Hey, what's up guys, Guardian here, coming you guys with a deck profile today on my Sanctuary Guard Dragon deck. Yeah, I've actually been playing this deck for a bit recently, along with Gurgwit. Quite convenient really, because I believe Gurgwit came out first, and then Sanctuary Guard came out afterwards, if I remember the order of my profiles from back then. Yeah, thought now was a good time to update this, since I've been playing it quite a lot, like I said, and it's actually been quite fun. Sanctuary Guard's really a fun deck, and just feels great to play. And yeah, let's get into it. So, we of course have the main grade 3 here, being Sanctuary Guard Dragon. We are playing 4 copies of him. Sanctuary Guard's really solid. He's a really good boss unit just because he gets 2 base crit as long as your opponent is grade 3 or greater. So, he is better going second technically, but he's also got a really good restand skill in that you can counterblast, rest 3 of your back row grade 1s, and discard a card from your hand. And then you restand him, and then your front row gets 10k. So he kind of applies a front trigger after restanding him, which is really good. That means he's going to be at minimum 23 when he restands, which is great. And of course, your force markers then make that even higher as well. So yeah, he's really solid. You know, the fact that he can just become 2 crit base, which means you can focus on force 1s to make power even higher, and then getting that restand with the power to the front row is really good, especially when it comes to facilitating your regard attacks to get over defensives. Yeah, really solid unit, so we're playing 4 copies of Sanctuary Guard. Alright, so next we are playing 4 grade 3s, 4 copies of Ashley. I was actually testing 3 of this out for a bit, but bumped it up to 4 just because I was having a little bit of bad luck when it came to riding a grade 3 sometimes. You know, it happens, but yeah, I just decided to go with 4 just for the consistency for the ride, but also she's just good in general. She's a great ride target when going first, and she's kind of okay going second because you can just do multi-attacks anywhere. But yeah, if you ride your Sanctuary Guard as well, you can just call the Ashleys to the Regard for multi-attack enabling, and it's actually pretty cool because with the force marker that you generate from the first grade 3 ride, you can actually set up some good numbers with the Ashley and then the Regard that you call afterwards, and then also the 10k to the front row can actually help that extra Regard to get over the defensives, depending on where the marker is, obviously. Now, also the crit skill of Ashley is pretty good as well because there are opportunities to definitely use it. Since your Sanctuary Guard becomes 2 crit, and also you have your 4 drive checks technically from the Sanctuary Guard restand as well. You have a good chance to see crits sometimes, and I do play 10 crits in this deck just as a slight spoiler. Because closing game states out is just really good to this deck because you could go 2 crit with the Vanguard, get a critical trigger on one of the other rears, and then your Ashley is actually another enabler to give a crit to a Regard that you call over her. So you could have, like, say, 3 attacks that all have 2 crit in them. So if your opponent's at 4 damage, that's a pretty good opportunity to kill them right there. So yeah, not too bad. And Ashley's just a solid unit, as we all know. And also, she's getting a reprint very soon in the next V set, so that's actually pretty handy as well. So hopefully that'll become a lot cheaper to get. Okay. So next we have the 4 copies of Wigston to go through the grade 2s here. Wigston, of course, it's the Sanctuary Guard grade 2, so when placed in Vanguard, you can counterblast, look at top 7 for a grade 1, and then call it to the Regard. So yeah, searches for your grade 1s, really good, and then also it gets power whilst on Regard, the top skill. For each grade 1 in your back row, he gets 5k. So he becomes 25, which is actually really good because it gets over a defensive, obviously. But then also, after a restand from your Sanctuary Guard, he'll become 35, which is good. Also, one other thing I just thought of actually with Ashley is that one element I love with this is the fact that she can actually search a grade 1 from your deck, technically, if you are missing a grade 1 from your deck. So not only do you have the grade 1 consistency with the Wigston, but Ashley is also kind of like a pseudo grade 1 searcher in that you have a grade 1 Jewel Knight, and that could actually give you the 3rd grade 1 that you need for your Sanctuary Guard skill. So that is also something to take in the mind that I just remembered there. So yeah. But yeah, Wigston, he's really good for a ride target, but I'd actually say the next grade 2 is a lot better for a ride target, which is of course going to be the 4 copies of Lily, the other Jewel Knight that we're playing. Now Lily is interesting just because riding her, it doesn't sound great initially, but it's actually the turn 3 that you're setting up, because you can actually ride into your Sanctuary Guard Dragon, and then he becomes 23k base on his own that entire turn, which means you can actually put the force marker that you get onto the Regard circle, and quite easily as well, to set up a good multi-attack enabler with Ashley. and get some pretty solid attacks out of that turn, which is actually pretty good. So yeah. So when you are in a situation to where you can either ride your Lely or your Wigston, I would actually suggest riding the Lely and then using your Wigston on the turn 3, because he can at least still be used along with Sanctuary Guard to gain the power that he gets from his skill to make him even bigger, obviously. So I feel like you're just getting more impact out of that lineup rather than, say, riding the Wigston on the grade 2 turn. But of course, if you don't have an option and Wigston is your only grade 2, ride it, please. But yeah, if you do see the Lely and you have the Wigston as well, I would actually ride Lely and then call the Wigston on the turn 3, because even on turn 2, let's say you only have one counterblast, unless you have Balnazal, the countercharger, it's actually a bit risky to call the Wigston down on the turn 2, because you're opening the door for your opponent to attack your rear, which, you know, hasn't used its power gain skill yet, so it's kind of wasted. But then also you deny yourself out of counterblast as well. So this can be fixed though if you have Balnazal for a countercharge, which is why it's actually quite particular in terms of who you're riding and when and what resources you have. So there's a little bit of thought into that, which is interesting, which I do like with this deck. But it is a good payoff though when things do go your way, obviously. So yeah, 4 copies of Lely, of course. And then for the last grade 2, I'm playing the 3 copies of Rabal. Rabal is actually a replacement for Liverot. Liverot, I know, is a very generic card for Royals, and it is good. But the thing I didn't like with Liverot is that it doesn't help me towards my win con, which is Sanctuary Guard Dragon, right? I need to get my grade 1s, and Liverot doesn't do that. He searches for grade 2s, and, you know, using a counterblast to get the Wigston, to then counterblast again, to then, you know, potentially get a grade 1, that's cool and all, but 2 CB and I don't even get a guaranteed grade 1 out of that doesn't feel great. And getting the Lely can be good and all, but sometimes you might actually need to make sure you've got some in the deck lined up for Ashley to then bring out maybe. So Rabal I decided on because I don't really play it for the protection skill, although that can come up sometimes. That is handy to have, don't get me wrong. I mainly use it for the draw effect, because drawing the 2 cards is going to give me more chances to see my grade 1s to then line up my turn 3 with the Sanctuary Guard Dragon. Also, you do get to put a non-grade 2 to the bottom of your deck, and that doesn't mean, you know, a normal unit. You can actually put a trigger unit back to the deck if you are not in need of them anymore. Or maybe you have too many and you just want to, like, you know, put some crits back in, and then with the effects like Ashley, who are going to shuffle your deck, you know, that gives you an opportunity to get those triggers to activate again. So that's actually pretty nice. So I've actually been enjoying the Rabal a lot more as of late, instead of something like Liverot. But like I said, this card actually got reprinted in the, you know, the most recent V set. And I think it was a promo before, if I remember. So yeah, I actually got access to this card from the V-Clan collection, which is nice. But yeah, I do prefer this over the Liverot a little bit. So I'm only playing 3 copies of those, because we do need to have a bit of space for our grade 1s here. So let's go through some of the easier ones here. We have 4 copies of Balnazal, so I spoke about him before. He's basically your countercharger. Again, with this deck, your riding can be very peculiar at times, because he's a good ride target, obviously. Top 7 for either Sanctuary Guard or the Wigston. Pretty good for ride consistency, of course, but again, if you have the option to ride into something else, let's say, you know, your Cecilius, this could actually be a bit better, because Cecilius, yes, it is good in terms of being an attacker and a booster, but you're not really going to be boosting with him in the late game, so it's kind of redundant there. So I'd actually prefer to ride the Cecilius sometimes, as long as I've got my grade 2 set up for the next turn. Yeah, I'll actually like prefer riding this over the Balnazal, because Balnazal can at least become a good utility piece for the late game for that counter charge to enable my counterblast skills like the Sanctuary Guard Dragon. So yeah, so Balnazal, really good card. You know, good utility piece for the counter charge. But yeah, if you do have the option to ride something else over him, do take that, but only if it's applicable. Like, don't not ride this if you need, like, say, your Wigston or your Sanctuary Guard. You know, you still need pieces. Do look for them. You know, best case scenario is that you have 2 of these in your hand, right? So you could ride one and then keep one of them for the late game, so that's also fine. So yeah, balance out, really, really good card, still playing 4 copies of him. And like I said, we have the 4 Cecilius, just as the grade 3 searcher. Good backup right target, and it's also just decent overall to get to the Sanctuary Guard, the Ashley more consistently. So yeah, our grade 3s are good, so we want to see them, so playing 4 copies of this. You could maybe drop Cecilius down to 3 if you wanted to fit some other cards in, but the next grade ones are actually there's a bit of a mixture here. So I'll go through these one by one, but we'll talk about them. So we have 2 copies of Morvidus, we have 2 copies of Augustus, and then we have 2 copies of Harold. So the reason I went for these is because Morvidus is got multiple purposes here. So one is that she's a Jewel Knight, which means she's searchable through your Ashley. So that gives you access to a grade 1 through her. She's also a good ride target as well, so she draws you a card when you ride on top of her. And also, if you call anything on top of her in the late game, like after you've rested her with Sanctuary Guard, you could actually call something on top of her potentially to then get a draw out of it. But the main utility is that she's a Jewel Knight, she's a grade 1, she's searchable with Ashley, and she's a good ride target. That's basically it. So you could, if you wanted to, put the other grade 1 Jewel Knight in the deck that came out from the previous, well, the most recent V set. Can't remember her name. I think it's Eunice, I think. I'm not too sure, but you can flex around with the grade 1 Jewel Knight if you want to. That's up to you. Now, these two are great. Augustus is really, really good just because basically at the end of the battle, your Vanguard attacked, you stand this unit whilst it's in the back or rear. So you've already attacked with your Sanctuary Guard, and then you're going to stand it back up, right? But then this can also stand back up, which means it can actually help boost your rear guards to then get to better thresholds of magic numbers, making it so that the opponent has to guard for more, right? So again, you're just getting that extra value out of this, just because you're resting it from the Sanctuary Guard anywhere, but then you're also re-standing it to get that extra power gain from the boost. So Augustus is really, really nice. And then I also like the Harold as well because, again, if you rest this with the Sanctuary Guard, if you're calling something out through like an Ashley skill, you can then give that power increase to that unit, since Harold, in case you are not aware, basically when your grade 2 is placed other than from your hand, so from your deck like Ashley, you can put it into your soul to give that unit 15k, which is really damn good, especially if you give it a crit from the Ashley counterblast. Really, really solid. So I've seen multiple scenarios where each of these have came up at the right time, or just, help me in the right scenario. Like, Ashley searching this just so I have another grade 1 to call to the field for Sanctuary Guard. Very clutch, but it came up and it's helped a lot. Augustus and Harold both help a lot as well when it comes to my rear guards and just getting that extra power to help push for lethal. Really, really good. So yeah, and also the fact that Harold goes under Soul as well is also nice, because you could just Soul Blast it out later for Ashley and then recycle it back into the deck for your Lily, so that's also good. But yeah, you could try Eunice instead of the Morvidus if you want to, but I also kind of just like the Morvidus as well, but that's up to you. But those are the utility grade ones that I've been playing with, so have at it and have a test around, but that's what I've been playing with. Alright, and then to wrap the deck up quite nicely here, we have, of course, the Ambrosius for the grade 0 starter, just the Sanctuary Guard starter, obviously. And then we have the triggers in the form of the crits, going with the Lou and the Flogel, and I actually have 10 crits in this deck with the Crit Sentinels. Like I said, this deck can apply lethal pretty easily, and ripping 1 crit can actually help you sustain a pretty good lethal attack pattern with your units to then close games out. So I feel like the 10 crit has been working fine, and also the 30k shield from this is just really nice sometimes, even if you draw it. So it's actually not too bad. And then, of course, we have the 2 draw PG, then we have the 4 heal Guardian. Yeah, pretty normal, I think. I think 10 crit's the way to go with Sanctuary Guard. You could maybe do 4 draw PG if you wanted to, but I'm quite happy with the crit build overall. And yeah, I mean, like I said, this deck has been very fun to play with. There's a lot of lines of play that open up to this deck in terms of how to set up the field for your Sanctuary Guard. And just managing your resources and going for the more preferable play, like the Lely over Wigsten ride target, for example. It's small things like that can actually make this deck rather interesting when it comes to thinking of what you're using at what point and what worst case scenarios can happen and how you can like overcome those possibilities, right? And yeah, I mean, Sanctuary Guard, like I said, really fun deck to play. And yeah, hope this updated list is satisfying for you guys. If you have any advice for the deck or suggestions, do drop it in the comment section below. And yeah, I will catch you guys in the next video. So like always, this is Guardian 2 5 signing out.